Picture a standard crime scene investigation. Your mind probably goes straight to the tangible stuff, right? Yellow tape, flashing lights, investigators meticulously dusting for prints or swabbing for DNA. But what if we take all of that away? Imagine a scene that's been meticulously scrubbed, a completely sterile environment where the perpetrator has left absolutely zero physical trace behind. No hair, no fibers, no literal fingerprints. What exactly happens then? Well, that's what we're getting into in today's Explainer. We're going to explore the fascinating and honestly pretty terrifying science of psychological fingerprints, those unseen clues that criminals inevitably leave behind. So let's dive right into this dark mystery. When investigators hit a wall because a scene has been wiped entirely clean of physical DNA, the investigation doesn't just stop, it pivots. Because here's the thing. A criminal can pour bleach on a floor, they can burn their clothes, and they can scrub a weapon until it literally shines, but they absolutely cannot bleach their own subconscious. They are leaving deep, identifiable pieces of their own minds behind. The killer is still leaving something incredibly specific, something so deeply rooted in their psyche that in most cases they couldn't stop themselves from leaving it even if they tried. To catch a killer who leaves no physical trace, investigators have to look past the tangible world. They have to search for what experts call a psychological fingerprint. Think about your actual physical thumbprint for a second. The unique loops and whorls on your fingers are permanent, dictated entirely by your biology. You can't just change them. In that exact same way, the inner workings, the obsessions, and the compulsions of a killer's mind create a unique, undeniable pattern. These behavioral signatures aren't just conscious choices or random habits. They are hardwired traits. And once an investigator knows how to read this invisible landscape, that psychological fingerprint becomes just as glaring, just as permanent, and honestly just as revealing as a bloody handprint left on a living room wall. Now, these psychological fingerprints typically manifest in two really fascinating ways: through the haunting drawings they sketch and the highly specific words they choose to write. Why these two mediums? Well, it's because drawing and writing require deliberate cognitive output. You literally have to think to create them. And when a highly disturbed mind engages in that kind of concentrated effort, it inadvertently leaks its inner reality. So when a killer leaves a note or takes the massive, time-consuming risk to actually draw a sketch at a crime scene, they aren't just making random noise or taunting the cops. They're giving investigators a direct window into their psychological makeup, unintentionally communicating exactly who they are. Now, theory is one thing, but to really grasp the power of this science, we have to look at the terrifying historical cases where this psychological mapping was put to the ultimate test in the field. Let's step into the real world for a moment and see exactly how these patterns play out. Looking back at the dark annals of true crime, two cases brilliantly illustrate just how varied and distinctive these imprints can actually be. First, consider the terrifying psychological trail of the freeway phantom back in the early 1970s. The Phantom didn't leave physical calling cards. Instead, he was identified by highly unique, recurring behavioral patterns. He had specific, ritualistic ways he interacted with the scenes and his victims, a very particular sequence of actions that became an undeniable behavioral signature. Contrast that with another 1970s killer known as the Doodler. The Doodler's psychological fingerprint was incredibly literal. He would sit down and sketch actual, hauntingly detailed portraits of his victims before he struck. We're talking about two completely different killers with two completely different methods. Yet, whether it was a ritualistic behavioral sequence or a pencil sketch, both left undeniable maps of their inner minds for investigators to follow. This heavy reliance on communication brings us to a critical, razor-sharp investigative tool, because decoding these specific patterns isn't just guesswork or basic observation. It's actually a rigorous, exact science. The moment a killer relies on written communication, they are unwittingly stepping right into the realm of forensic linguistics. This is where the psychological fingerprint becomes incredibly granular. We're shifting away from the broad strokes of observing behavioral patterns and we're placing a microscopic lens over individual syllables, punctuation marks, and sentence structures. So what exactly is forensic linguistics? It's the scientific analysis of language to profile and identify suspects. Investigators use this specialized field to weigh the psychological DNA of every single syllable left by a killer. Picture a linguist poring over a single terrifying paragraph for hours on end. They aren't just reading the note for its surface-level threat. They are completely dissecting the syntax. They're analyzing the grammatical structure, the colloquialisms, the spelling errors, and the very specific vocabulary being used. Through this painstaking process, they can build a surprisingly accurate profile of the suspect's background, their level of education, where they grew up, and even their exact psychological state at the time they were writing.
Let me give you a brilliant illustration of just how powerful linguistics can be. Imagine you're an investigator reading a frantic, violent, highly emotionally charged note left at a scene. And suddenly, right in the middle of all this chaos, you stumble upon a highly formal word like tantamount. What does that actually tell you? Well, under extreme stress, the human brain naturally defaults to its most ingrained linguistic state. So discovering a word like tantamount in this chaotic context acts as a massive, glaring anomaly. It points to a specific level of higher education, a distinct reading habit, or even a subconscious, deeply ingrained attempt to assert intellectual dominance. It is not just a vocabulary word. It's a massive psychological clue.
Pinpointing such a specific, out-of-place word like that is the exact psychological equivalent of finding a clear thumbprint right on the murder weapon itself. It operates like a massive investigative funnel. Just think about the pure math of it for a second. That single word might instantly eliminate 90% of the population from the suspect pool. The weight of that one word tells investigators they aren't just looking for a random attacker. They're looking for someone whose psychological and linguistic background naturally produces the word tantamount under highly stressful circumstances. In an instant, the suspect pool shrinks from thousands to maybe just a few dozen. It's a real game changer. But here's the catch. Forensic linguistics only really tells us who is communicating. To understand why they leave these clues, why they take such massive, unnecessary risks to write a note or draw a picture, we have to dig down into the primal, deeply rooted biology of a killer. For a long time, standard profiling basically assumed that leaving a signature was just a killer playing an intellectual game with the police. But researchers have uncovered something far darker. This signature isn't an intellectual exercise at all. It goes far, far deeper than some simple mind game. We can actually track the escalation of this signature, and it follows a very precise sequence. It starts as a profound psychological tension. Think of it like an unbearable, deep-seated itch within the killer's mind. The physical act of drawing a sketch or writing a specific formal word is the literal scratch that relieves that immense tension. And finally, the result left at the scene functions as a permanent biological territory marker. It's the resulting scar. The killer feels this overwhelming urge that absolutely must be satisfied. The physical act releases the pressure, and the final object they leave behind serves a profoundly primal purpose. We've all seen the movies and the TV shows, right? The criminal mastermind leaves a playing card, or a single rose, or some cryptic riddle just to taunt the cops. Hollywood frames the signature as this arrogant, conscious, ego-driven calling card. But the science completely reframes everything we thought we knew. The scientific reality isn't about human ego, it's about an animalistic need. A killer's signature is an involuntary, ingrained biological compulsion. It is literally the exact same thing as a predator out in the wild, aggressively marking its territory to signal dominance to other predators. Understanding this radically changes how investigations operate. Catching a serial killer relies so heavily on decoding this primal need to mark territory, rather than just hunting for a stray strand of physical DNA. When investigators look at a haunting sketch left by the doodler or a strangely formal word like tantamount in a threatening letter, they are not looking at a conscious choice made by a rational human being. They're looking at a killer acting on a predatory compulsion. The killer is biologically driven to leave that mark. They are literally a slave to their own psychological fingerprint, completely incapable of stopping themselves from leaving a piece of their mind behind. So as we wrap up this explainer and trace this journey from the permanent loops on a physical thumb to the incredibly revealing choice of a word like tantamount, all the way down to an unbearable biological itch, we are left with a pretty chilling realization. We spend so much time looking for the logical, rational reasons behind a crime, but when we look closely at the science of psychological fingerprints, from linguistic anomalies to compulsive sketches, we really have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. When investigators decode these horrific scenes, are they hunting modern human criminals, or are they tracking the terrifying instinctual markers of a primal predator?